The war didn't end with a victory. It ended with a choice no one was supposed to make. The wind moved like a low hum across the outpost deck, carrying fine grains of frost that ticked softly against metal plating, the kind of sound you only noticed when everything else had gone quiet. Sergeant Ethan Cole stood with his boots locked shoulder-width apart on the marked execution line, the synthetic surface beneath him faintly vibrating from the station's aging power core. His rifle rested in his hands, not raised, not lowered, just waiting, the barrel still warm from routine checks. A thin curl of vapor slipping into the cold air, his HUD flickered in the corner of his vision. Oxygen levels stable, external temperature reading 14 degrees Fahrenheit, wind speed climbing. None of it mattered. Not really. Not compared to the figure kneeling 10 feet in front of him. She was smaller than he expected, not weak, just contained. Her posture upright despite the restraint field humming faintly around her wrists. Her skin held a soft blue luminance, like light trapped beneath glass, shifting subtly with each breath, and her eyes. He noticed those first, steady, unblinking, not defiant, not afraid, just aware, as if she had already calculated every possible outcome and accepted them all. Ethan adjusted his grip, the polymer handle creaking softly under his glove. He'd done this before. Not here, not like this, but close enough. Orders were orders. That was the line they fed you until it stopped sounding like a sentence and started feeling like gravity, something you couldn't argue with. The comm unit in his ear crackled once, then settled into a steady channel. Cole, confirm readiness. The voice was flat, distant, procedural. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed locked on the alien woman, Lyra Vex. That was the name on the file. High-value detainee. No trial authorized. No transfer request. Just a timestamp and a directive. Clean, efficient, final. Cole. The voice repeated, sharper this time. He exhaled slowly, a thin cloud forming in front of his face, then fading just as quickly. Ready, he said, his own voice sounding further away than he expected. The restraint field around her pulsed once, adjusting, humming at a lower frequency. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just tilted her head slightly, studying him with a kind of quiet focus that felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. Do humans always follow orders they don't understand? Her voice was calm, clear, the translator smoothing her tone into something almost familiar. The question landed softer than it should have, and somehow that made it harder to ignore. Ethan's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the targeting reticle hovering faintly over her center mass. The system waiting for confirmation, always waiting. Not my place to understand. He replied, the words automatic, worn smooth from use. She considered that, her gaze shifting briefly to the horizon beyond him, where the pale sky met the edge of the station's shield barrier, then back to him. Then whose place is it? She asked, not accusing, not pleading, just asking. Like the answer actually mattered. The comm hissed again. Execute the prisoner. Cole. That's an order. The words cut clean through the moment. Sharp, precise, familiar. Ethan felt his fingers settle against the trigger, the slight resistance, the measured weight. He'd trained for this, muscle memory ready to carry him through the rest. But something didn't align. Not the stance, not the target, something quieter, deeper, like a misread signal buried under layers of protocol. The wind picked up, sweeping a thin veil of frost across the deck between them, and for a second, just a second, the world narrowed to the space between his finger and the decision it was about to make. The trigger did not move, but the seconds did, each one stretching thin against the cold air like a wire ready to snap. Ethan could hear his own breathing inside the helmet, steady but louder than it should have been, the kind of sound that filled the gaps when everything else fell silent. His HUD pulsed once, then again, a soft amber warning blinking near the reticle, awaiting confirmation, awaiting compliance, awaiting something he had never questioned before. Cole, execute immediately. Voice returned, sharper now, edged with the kind of authority that usually settled things without resistance. But it did not settle this. Not anymore. Ethan's eyes shifted, not away from her, but across her, noticing details his training would have ignored. The faint tremor in the restraint field, the subtle fluctuation in its energy pattern, the way her shoulders remained relaxed despite it all. She was not bracing, not preparing. She was waiting, And that was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. You are hesitating, Lyra said quietly, her voice cutting through the static like a clean signal, not accusing, just observing. Ethan swallowed. His throat dry despite the regulated humidity inside his suit. I am following orders, he replied. But even to him, it sounded incomplete, like a sentence missing its ending. Her eyes held his again, unwavering. Then follow them, she said, and for a brief moment, something almost like a smile touched the edge of her expression, not mockery, not relief, something else. Something he could not place, but understand what you are choosing. The wind shifted direction, sweeping colder now, biting through the exposed seams of the platform. Ethan adjusted his stance, the motion automatic, grounding. His finger tightened slightly, just enough to feel the threshold, the exact point where intent became action. He had crossed that line before without thinking, without pausing, because pausing was where doubt lived, and doubt was not something soldiers were trained to carry. The comm crackled again, overlapping voices this time, layered, urgent. Cole, this is your final confirmation. Do it now. That is a direct order. The words stacked on top of each other until they blurred into noise. Ethan's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to the horizon, the pale line where sky met shield, then back to her. And in that moment, something shifted, not outside, but inside. A quiet recalibration, like a system realizing it had been reading the wrong data all along. If you kill me, Lyra said, her voice softer now, almost lost beneath the wind. Nothing changes. Ethan's brow tightened, the words slipping past his defenses before he could stop them. And if I do not? He asked, the question leaving his mouth before he could pull it back. Her eyes softened, just slightly, enough to be noticed. Then something finally does. The comm went silent for half a second, then returned with a single, cold line. Sergeant Cole, execute the prisoner now or you will be charged with insubordination. The word hung there, heavier than the weapon in his hands. Insubordination, a line drawn not in sand, but in consequence. Ethan felt the weight of it settle into his chest, into his bones, into the space where certainty used to live. His finger eased, just a fraction, not enough to disengage, but enough to break the illusion that this was automatic, that this was inevitable. The rifle hummed softly, waiting, the system still ready to complete the command. But for the first time, it was not the system making the decision. It was him, and that realization did not feel like power. It felt like gravity, like stepping off something solid and realizing there was nothing beneath your feet except the choice you were about to make. The silence did not last long. It never did. Systems were not designed to tolerate hesitation, and neither were the people behind them. Ethan felt the shift before he heard it, a subtle change in the hum beneath his boots, the station responding, recalibrating, adjusting to a deviation it did not expect. His HUD flickered again, this time with a sharper pulse. Command override pending, authorization request denied. The words scrolled across the edge of his vision in cold, efficient text. Cole, report your status. The voice returned, lower now, controlled, the kind of tone that came just before consequences were made official. Ethan did not answer. His eyes remained on Lyra, on the way the faint blue glow of her skin reflected off the frost between them, on the way she remained completely still, as if she understood that whatever happened next would not come from her, but from him. You are still deciding, she said softly, and there was no judgment in it, only recognition. Ethan exhaled slowly, the breath steady now, more controlled, the chaos inside him settling into something sharper, more focused. No, he said, almost to himself. I already decided. His finger eased fully off the trigger, the tension releasing in a small, almost imperceptible motion, but it felt louder than any shot he had ever fired. The rifle dipped, just a few inches, enough to break alignment with the targeting system, enough to confuse the algorithm waiting for completion. The HUD reacted. Instantly, warning indicators flashing in tight, controlled bursts. Weapon misalignment detected. Reacquire target. Confirm execution. The system wanted correction, wanted him to return to the path it understood, but Ethan did not adjust. He let the rifle lower another inch, then another, until the barrel pointed harmlessly at the deck between them. The comm channel exploded with overlapping voices, no longer controlled, no longer distant, like echoes from a place he had already stepped away from. Ethan reached up with his free hand and tapped the side of his helmet. The motion deliberate. The channel cut cleanly, silence rushing back in to fill the space they left behind. Real silence this time. Not the kind filled with orders, just wind and metal and breath. He stepped forward, one measured pace, the frost crunching softly under his boot. Lyra's eyes followed him, not widening, not shifting, just tracking, aware, present. If I do this, he said, his voice low, steady. There is no going back. She held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something else there. Not relief, not fear, something closer to respect. There was never a path back, she replied. Only the illusion of one. Ethan let that settle, just for a second, then nodded once, a small, final motion. His hand moved to the control panel on his forearm, fingers hovering over the restraint override interface. The system hesitated, security protocols. Flaring, unauthorized access, restricted command. The panel pulsed red against his glove, waiting for clearance it would not receive. Ethan did not wait for permission. He pressed down anyway, the contact firm, intentional. The panel resisted for half a heartbeat, then shifted, the resistance giving way under the force of a decision already made. The restraint field around Lyra flickered, its steady hum breaking into a fractured tone, light bending, stuttering, the air around her rippling like heat over asphalt. Ethan felt his pulse rise, not with fear, but with clarity, the kind that came when there were no more variables left to consider, only action, only consequence. The field destabilized further, its glow dimming, collapsing inward in controlled segments, until with a final soft hiss, it disappeared completely, leaving nothing between them but cold air and choice. Lyra did not move right away. She remained where she was, as if honoring the moment for what it was, not an escape. Not yet, but a turning point, something quiet and irreversible. Ethan lowered his hand from the panel, the system on his arm flashing warning after warning, but he did not look at it. His attention stayed on her, on the fact that she was no longer bound, no longer contained, and yet still here, still choosing to remain in front of him. Why? He asked, the question simple. Stripped of everything else, Lyra rose slowly to her feet, the motion smooth, unhurried, her height now matching his, her presence no longer confined, and for the first time, the space between them felt equal. Because you finally did something your system could not predict, she said, her voice carrying a quiet weight. You chose. The wind moved again, softer this time, carrying the faint echo of distant alarms beginning to wake somewhere deeper in the station. Ethan heard them, registered them, but they felt far away, secondary. What mattered was right in front of him. The moment, the choice, and the realization that whatever came next would not be dictated by orders, but by what he had just done. He had not ended anything. Not yet, but he had changed the direction, and for the first time since the war began, that felt like something real. The alarms did not scream. They pulsed, low and controlled, a steady vibration that moved through the metal beneath Ethan's boots and into his bones, the kind of alert designed not to panic but to correct, to bring things back into alignment before they slipped too far. But Ethan knew that threshold had already been crossed. There was no correction for this. Not anymore. He turned his head slightly, scanning the perimeter of the execution deck. The overhead lights had shifted from white to a muted amber, casting longer shadows across the frost. The station was waking up to what he had done. Systems rerouting, protocols activating, somewhere deeper inside. People were already moving, responding, closing in. They will come, Lyra said, her voice calm, almost thoughtful, as if she were noting the obvious rather than warning him. Ethan nodded once, his grip on the rifle loosening just enough to make it feel less like a tool and more like a weight he was still deciding how to carry. They always do, he replied, his eyes flicking briefly to the access corridor 20 yards to his left, a narrow passage lined with reinforced bulkheads and dim guide lights. It was the only exit from the deck, and now it felt smaller than it had a minute ago. You should go, he added, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. Lyra did not move toward the corridor. Instead, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them by a single, deliberate pace. The frost crunching softly under her bare feet, unaffected by the cold in a way that still felt unnatural to him. "If I run now," she said, her eyes steady on his, "this becomes a chase." Ethan's jaw tightened. He understood what she meant. Pursuit protocols, tracking systems, containment fields. The station was built for that, designed to ensure nothing left without permission. "And if you stay?" he asked, his voice lower now, more measured. She tilted her head slightly. That same subtle motion from before, studying him as if recalculating something. "Then it becomes a choice they have to witness," she answered, the words settling heavier than he expected. Ethan let out a slow breath, the air fogging briefly before disappearing into the cold. He glanced down at his forearm panel, the warnings still flashing in sharp red intervals. Unauthorized release, command violation, disciplinary action pending. The system had already categorized him, reduced his decision to a list of consequences, but none of it addressed what mattered now. The moment, the presence of her standing there, free and unafraid. "You knew this would happen," he said, not accusing, just connecting the pieces out loud. Lyra's expression softened, just enough to be noticed. "I hoped it might," she replied. "But hope is not a strategy." Ethan almost smiled at that. A brief, dry shift at the corner of his mouth. It felt strange, almost out of place here, but it was real, and that mattered more than anything the system could display. The vibration underfoot intensified slightly, followed by the distant hiss of a pressure seal releasing somewhere down the corridor. They were getting closer, time compressing again, tightening around the edges of the moment. Ethan adjusted his stance, turning his body just enough to place himself between Lyra and the corridor, not as a barrier, but as a statement, a position. "When they get here," he said, "they will not ask questions." Lyra's gaze moved past him for a fraction of a second, sensing the approach before hearing it, then returned to his. "Then we should not wait for them to," she said. There was no urgency in her tone, no panic, just a clear, quiet direction. Ethan hesitated for half a heartbeat, not because he doubted her, but because he understood what came next. Movement would turn this from a moment into an action, and actions could not be undone. He nodded once, decision settling into place, then stepped toward the corridor, the rifle still lowered but ready, not aimed at anything, just present. Lyra moved with him, matching his pace without hesitation, her presence at his side no longer that of a prisoner, but something else entirely, something undefined but undeniable. As they reached the threshold of the corridor, the amber lights shifted again, deepening toward red, the station no longer attempting to correct, now fully engaged in response. Ethan paused for a fraction of a second at the entrance, glancing back at the execution line behind them. The marks still visible on the deck, unchanged, as if nothing had happened there at all. He held that image for a moment, then turned away from it, stepping into the corridor with Lyra beside him, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly in the narrowing space. And for the first time, the path ahead was not something assigned to him. It was something he was choosing, one step at a time. The corridor felt narrower with every step, not because its walls moved, but because the space inside Ethan's mind was tightening, compressing under the weight of what he had already done and what still waited ahead. The red emergency lights pulsed in slow intervals overhead, painting the metallic surfaces in shifting shadows, each flash revealing details he had never noticed before. Scuff marks along the lower panels, faint condensation near the ventilation seams, the quiet imperfections of a system built to look flawless. Their footsteps echoed in a steady rhythm, 2 sets now instead of 1, and that alone felt like a disruption the station could not ignore. Ethan kept his rifle angled downward, not hidden, not threatening, just present, a silent acknowledgement that he understood the rules even as he broke them. "They are sealing sectors," Lyra said, her voice soft but certain, her gaze unfocused for a moment, as if she were listening to something deeper than sound. Ethan glanced at his forearm panel, the interface flickering between warning screens and system maps, access points turning red one by one, corridors closing off in calculated patterns, containment protocol. He muttered, more to himself than to her. "They're trying to box us in." Lyra nodded slightly, her expression unchanged. "They are trying to predict you," she corrected. Ethan exhaled through his nose, a short breath. That almost became a laugh, but stopped before it could fully form. Good luck with that, he said quietly. Though he knew the station's systems were not guessing. They were calculating, and calculations had a way of catching up. They reached an intersection 20 feet ahead, 3 possible paths branching off, each marked by dim directional strips along the floor. Ethan slowed, his eyes scanning the layout. The left corridor led toward the main transit hub, 2 open, 2 monitored. The right descended deeper into maintenance levels, tighter, darker, less predictable. Straight ahead would take them back toward command sectors. The worst possible option. Left is faster, he said, thinking out loud. But they will expect that. Lyra's gaze followed his, then shifted to the right passage, the light there weaker, almost swallowed by shadow. Faster is not always better, she said. Ethan nodded once, decision forming quickly. He angled toward the right corridor without another word. Their pace steady but not rushed. Urgency kept just below the surface where it would not turn into panic. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, the hum of the main systems fading into a lower, more mechanical rhythm. Pipes lined the walls here, faint vibrations running through them like distant heartbeats. The floor changed texture under their boots, less polished, more functional, designed for maintenance crews rather than officers. Ethan's HUD adjusted automatically, light amplification increasing, sharpening the edges of the dim corridor. You move like someone who has done this before, Lyra observed, her tone carrying a quiet curiosity. Ethan kept his eyes forward, scanning corners, checking angles. Not this, he replied. But close enough. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just present. Then she spoke again, softer this time. You are not afraid. Ethan considered that for a moment. The question settling deeper than it seemed on the surface. He felt the tension in his shoulders, the heightened awareness, the knowledge that every step could lead to interception. I am, he said finally, honest without hesitation. I just decided it was not the most important thing right now. Lyra's gaze lingered on him for a second longer than before, something unreadable passing through her expression. Then she looked ahead again, the corridor narrowing further as they approached a sealed bulkhead door, its surface marked with warning symbols and a faint blue status. Light, inactive but not locked. Ethan stepped up to the panel beside it, his gloved hand hovering over the interface. The system hesitated as it registered his credentials, conflict flags appearing, access partially restricted. It will not open for you, Lyra said quietly, not as a challenge, just as a statement. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying the panel, then glanced at her. It does not have to open for me, he said, stepping back half a pace and gesturing toward it. Lyra moved forward, her hand lifting toward the interface, the faint glow of her skin reflecting off the metal surface. For a moment, nothing happened, then the panel flickered, its light shifting from blue to a soft, responsive white. The door released with a low, controlled hiss, sliding open just enough to reveal the darkness beyond. Ethan watched the mechanism, then looked at her again, understanding settling in another layer deeper. You are not just a prisoner, he said. Lyra met his gaze, calm, steady. No, she replied, and stepped through the doorway without hesitation. Ethan followed a heartbeat later, the door closing behind them with a quiet finality, sealing off the path they had just left and whatever was waiting there for them. The darkness beyond the bulkhead was not empty. It was layered, filled with the quiet presence of systems that did not announce themselves, the kind of space built for function rather than visibility. Ethan's HUD adjusted again, brightness rising just enough to reveal the outlines of narrow walkways and recessed conduits running along the walls. The air here felt different, cooler, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent that lingered at the back of his throat. The door sealed behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, cutting off the distant pulse of alarms and replacing it with a deeper, steadier hum. Lyra moved ahead without hesitation, her steps silent against the grated floor, her glow the only consistent light in the corridor. Ethan followed half a pace behind, his rifle still lowered but his senses sharpened, every sound magnified in the confined space, every movement deliberate. Where are we? He asked quietly, his voice absorbed quickly by the narrow passage. Lyra did not look back, but her answer came without delay. Between layers, she said. Places your system does not prioritize. Ethan glanced around, noting the lack of visible sensors, the absence of standard surveillance nodes. It made sense. Areas like this were designed to be ignored, to exist without drawing attention. Blind spots, he murmured. Lyra inclined her head slightly. Only if you rely on sight. They continued forward, the corridor bending gradually to the right, then descending at a shallow angle. The incline subtle but noticeable underfoot. Ethan's forearm panel flickered again, attempting to reconnect to the main network. Signal degraded, location uncertain. The system did not like uncertainty. It preferred coordinates, boundaries, definitions, none of which existed clearly down here. You did not just open that door, Ethan said after a moment, the thought finally forming into words. You changed it. Lyra slowed slightly, just enough for him to come alongside her, her eyes shifting toward the wall as if she could see through it. Your systems are built on patterns, she said. Predictable responses to predictable inputs. Ethan nodded, understanding the concept even if he did not fully grasp how she applied it. And you are not predictable, he said. Lyra looked at him then, directly, her expression calm but carrying a weight that felt older than the station around them. Neither are you, she replied, the words settling into him in a way he did not expect, not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact. They reached another junction, this one narrower, the ceiling dropping a few inches lower, forcing Ethan to tilt his head slightly as he passed through. The passage ahead was darker, the light from Lyra's skin reflecting faintly off the metal surfaces, creating shifting patterns that moved with her. Why did you let yourself be captured? Ethan asked, the question rising naturally now that the pieces no longer fit the original narrative. Lyra did not answer immediately, her gaze moving forward, focused on something beyond the visible path. Because your people needed to believe they had control, she said finally. And because I needed to find someone who did not. Ethan felt that settle deeper than the rest, the implication clear without needing explanation. You were looking for someone like me, he said, not as a question. Lyra's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel intentional. I was looking for a choice, she corrected. They moved again, the corridor opening slightly into a small maintenance chamber, circular, with access panels lining the walls and a central console dimly lit. In standby mode, the hum here was stronger, more concentrated, as if the systems beneath the surface were closer, more immediate. Ethan stepped inside, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. He scanned the room quickly, identifying exits, potential cover, instinct guiding his movements even now. Lyra moved to the central console, her hand hovering above it, the light responding faintly to her presence. This will take us out of their reach, she said, her voice steady. Ethan watched her, the pieces aligning into something larger than escape, larger than survival. Out of the station, he said. Lyra glanced back at him, her eyes reflecting the dim light in a way that made them seem almost infinite. Out of their war, she replied, and for a moment, the hum of the systems around them seemed to quiet, as if even the station itself was listening to what that meant. The console did not look important, which was exactly why it mattered. Its surface was worn smooth by years of unnoticed use, a faint layer of dust collecting along the edges where standard cleaning routines never reached. Ethan stepped closer, his boots echoing softly in the circular chamber, the sound contained, controlled, as if the room itself refused to let anything escape too quickly. Lyra's hand hovered just above the interface, not touching, not activating, waiting. If this takes us out, Ethan said, his voice low, measured. Then why is it still here? Lyra did not look at him, her eyes fixed on the dim glow beneath her fingers. Because no one believes it leads anywhere important, she replied. Ethan glanced at the surrounding panels, at the aging conduits and the lack of active security. It fit. The station ignored what it did not value, and that made those spaces more powerful than anything it guarded. And you do, he said. Lyra's fingers lowered slightly, the light beneath them responding with a faint ripple. I know where it leads, she corrected. The console flickered to life, its surface illuminating in soft layers of shifting symbols that did not match any interface Ethan had seen before. His HUD attempted to interpret them, then failed. the translation buffer stalling, unable to map meaning onto what it did not recognize. That is not Terran, he said. More to confirm than to question, Lyra nodded once. It is older, she said, her tone carrying a quiet certainty. Older than your war. Ethan felt a subtle shift in the room, not physical, but perceptual, like the space had just revealed a deeper layer beneath its surface, something that had always been there, but never acknowledged. The hum intensified slightly, resonating through the floor and up into his chest, steady, deliberate. What happens when you activate it? He asked, his eyes moving between her and the console. Lyra paused for a fraction of a second, not uncertain, just allowing the moment to settle. Then you will no longer belong to their system, she said, the words simple, but the meaning behind them anything but. Ethan let out a slow breath, his gaze dropping briefly to his forearm panel. The warnings still flashing, disciplinary action pending, identity flagged, status compromised. The system had already begun to erase him in its own way, reducing him to a problem to be resolved. He looked back up at her, at the calm in her expression, at the absence of hesitation. And you, he asked, where do you belong? Lyra finally turned her head toward him, her eyes meeting his with a clarity that felt almost disarming. That depends on what you decide next, she said, the answer not evasive, but open, leaving space where certainty used to be. The distant vibration of the station shifted again, stronger now, closer. The response teams were narrowing their search, closing in on the blind spots one by one. Ethan could feel it in the rhythm of the structure, in the way the air carried subtle changes in pressure. Time was no longer stretching, it was tightening, compressing toward a point that could not be avoided. He stepped closer to the console, standing beside her now rather than behind. The position intentional, equal, his reflection faintly visible in the dim surface, distorted by the alien symbols moving beneath it. If I go through with this, he said, his voice steady despite the weight of it, there is no returning, no explaining, no fixing it later. Lyra watched him, her expression unchanged, but her presence somehow more focused, more present. You are not fixing anything, she said softly. You are ending something. The words settled into him, not heavy, but final, like a door closing somewhere deep inside. Ethan nodded once, the motion small but complete. His hand moved toward the console, hovering just above the surface, mirroring hers from moments before. The light responded instantly, patterns shifting, aligning, recognizing intent rather than command. They are almost here, Lyra said, not urgently, just acknowledging the reality of it. Ethan did not look toward the door, did not check the corridor. For the first time since stepping onto the execution line, he was not reacting to what was coming. He was choosing what to do before it arrived. Then we should not keep them waiting, he said, quietly, and lowered his hand to meet the light. The moment his hand touched the surface, the console did not react with resistance. It responded with recognition, the shifting symbols beneath his palm aligning in a pattern that felt less like code and more like something alive, something aware. A low resonance spread outward from the point of contact, subtle at first, then growing, filling the chamber with a steady vibration that settled into Ethan's chest like a second heartbeat. The lights dimmed further, not shutting down, but redirecting, focusing toward the console as if the entire room had decided this was the only thing that mattered. Lyra's hand rested beside his, not overlapping, not guiding, just present, equal. The glow from her skin blending with the soft illumination of the interface. It is not a door, she said quietly, her voice almost lost beneath the hum. It is a transition. Ethan did not look away from the surface, his reflection barely visible beneath the moving patterns, distorted, shifting. To where? He asked, though he already understood the answer would not be simple. Lyra's gaze moved across the console, following the changes as if reading something beyond language. To a place your system cannot define, she said, the words settling into the air with a kind of quiet certainty. Behind them, the distant sound of movement finally reached the chamber, not loud, not chaotic, but organized, controlled. The unmistakable presence of personnel moving with purpose, closing in. The station had found them, or at least narrowed the possibilities down to this level. Ethan felt the tension rise again, not as panic, but as awareness, the final window narrowing. They are here, he said, not turning, not breaking contact with the console. Lyra nodded slightly. Yes, she replied, her tone unchanged, as if this had always been part of the sequence. The resonance beneath their hands intensified, the symbols accelerating. Shifting faster now, aligning into structures that Ethan could not understand but could feel, like standing near something vast and unseen. The air itself seemed to bend slightly, not visibly, but perceptibly, as if the space around them was being asked to reconsider its own boundaries. Once this completes, Lyra said, her voice steady, you will not be able to return. Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement, a final internal checkpoint, then opened them again, his focus sharper than before. I already crossed that line, he said quietly. The sound of the chamber door behind them shifted, a controlled release of pressure, followed by the faint mechanical glide of it beginning to open. The station had caught up, the timing exact, precise, almost inevitable. Ethan did not turn to face it, did not raise his rifle. The decision had already been made before this moment. Everything now was simply following through. The console's light surged once, bright enough to cast clear shadows against the walls, then softened into a steady, enveloping glow, the patterns beneath their hands locking into place, no longer shifting, no longer searching, the transition stabilizing. Ethan, Lyra said, his name clear and deliberate, the first time she had used it. He glanced at her, just briefly, enough to meet her eyes, to see the reflection of the light there, not as something foreign, but as something shared. This was never about escape, she said, and there was something in her voice now, something deeper, more human than before. It was about choice. The door behind them slid open fully, the light from the corridor spilling into the chamber, sharp, defined, cutting across the floor. The presence beyond it felt immediate, close enough to act, to intervene, to reclaim what had been lost. Ethan turned his gaze forward again, back to the console, back to the light beneath his hand. The resonance peaked, then shifted, not louder, but deeper, like a note dropping into a frequency that could no longer be heard, only felt. The edges of the room seemed to blur, not visually, but conceptually, as if the space itself was loosening its hold on them. Then let them see, he said quietly, not to Lyra, not to the people at the door, but to the moment itself. And as the light expanded, it did not consume the room. It simply moved through it, like a tide that did not destroy what it touched, but changed it, carrying them with it into something the station could not follow, could not measure, could not stop. The light did not fade. It settled, like a horizon pulling itself closer until it was no longer something distant, but something you stood inside. The chamber, the console, the open doorway behind them, all of it remained, and yet felt removed, as if it belonged to a version of reality that had already moved on without them. Ethan felt the ground beneath his boots steady, not shifting, not dissolving, just no longer tied to the place he had been. The hum that had filled the room moments before was gone, replaced by a quiet so complete it felt deliberate, like silence chosen rather than imposed. He lowered his hand from the console without resistance, the surface beneath it now smooth, inactive, as if nothing had ever been there to begin with. He turned slightly, not quickly, just enough to take in what remained of the chamber. The door still open, the corridor beyond still lit in sharp red. Figures visible at the threshold, frozen not by force but by something less tangible, something like uncertainty. They had arrived at the exact moment they were supposed to, and yet there was nothing left for them to stop, nothing left to contain. Lyra stood beside him, her presence unchanged and yet somehow clearer, the glow of her skin softer now, more integrated with the space around them, as if she belonged here in a way the station never had. They can see us, Ethan said quietly, not as a question, just acknowledging the connection that still lingered. Lyra nodded once, her gaze moving toward the doorway, not with defiance, not with fear, just with a calm recognition. They can see what you chose, she replied. Ethan followed her gaze, meeting the distant figures with a steady look. There was no need to raise his weapon, no need to speak. The moment did not require defense or explanation. It simply existed, complete in itself. He felt something shift inside him then. Not a release, not relief. Something quieter, more permanent, like a weight that had been part of him for so long he no longer noticed it had finally lifted. What happens now? He asked, his voice low, the question less about direction and more about meaning. Lyra turned her attention back to him, her eyes reflecting not light, but depth. Now, she said, they learn. Ethan let that settle, not as a statement about the future, but as something already in motion, already unfolding beyond the limits of what he could see. He took a step forward, not away from the chamber, but into the space that had formed around them. The air felt different here, not heavier or lighter, just open, like it no longer pressed back against him. Lyra moved with him, her presence no longer something he followed or led, but something that existed alongside him, equal, aligned. The chamber behind them remained visible for a moment longer, the figures at the doorway still standing, still watching. Then slowly, almost gently, it receded, not vanishing, not collapsing, simply becoming distant, like a memory that no longer defined the present. Ethan did not look back again. He did not need to. Whatever had been there was already part of something finished, something complete. He looked ahead instead, though there was no clear path, no marked direction, just a sense of movement that did not rely on distance or coordinates. You said this would take us out of their war, he said, the words steady, grounded. Lyra inclined her head slightly. It already has, she replied. Ethan considered that, the simplicity of it, the finality, and for the first time, it did not feel like an escape. It felt like an end, not of everything, but of something that had gone on far too long without question. He let out a slow breath, the air leaving his lungs without the tightness that had been there before, and as he stepped forward again, there was no resistance, no system to push back, no command waiting to be followed, only the quiet continuation of a choice he had already made, and somewhere far behind them, in a station that could no longer reach him, the echo of that choice remained, not as an act of defiance, but as something far simpler, something far more difficult, the moment a human decided to be more than what he was told to be.